In part 2, I conclude my conversation with Johnny Duhan. So, what are the signs? Do you see specific things that are happening in Irish society that you can link to the decline in religious practice or religious belief?
I spent 25 years working for St. Vincent de Paul just as a foot soldier. When I joined, I said, I don't want to get involved in any of the administration or anything like that. I don't want to go to any of the big meetings that you have in town. And when you get to the final chapter and that, I left. And I left for one reason. And it's because all the Christian charities, all the charities in Ireland are now funded by the government and the EU. But to get that funding, which has become fundamental for they need it, they have to sign a contract with the government whereby they will not participate or they will not go against any governmental laws that are brought in.
Right.
So that's a fundamental thing that they made. All the charities have done it.
And is this a recent thing, or has this always been the case?
I only learned about it in its bleakest form when I actually started looking into it. No, they do get their funding, but how I discovered it was it's about something that it's a very difficult question about the last referendum that came in when abortion.
Yes.
I approached the top brass there, and
in the Vincent de Paul.
I wrote to them and I said, look, I can't go along with this, and I can't go along with gay marriage. I've written articles in the Independent about it.
Yes.
And I can't go along with the last referendum. And I said, how come you are not advising we're a Christian organisation? And they said, we can't. We signed a contract with the government. So they give us funding. So if we advise our members to go against them, the funding will be cut.
Now this is, I wasn't aware of this. This is really interesting because I can recall, as I'm sure you do yourself, back in the day when people would be out in the street with little boxes and flags collecting money for whatever charity they were collecting for. I don't recall there was any question of the government funding these organisations.
Yeah, I think this is a terrible development myself. Not only for them, but it's also had the knock-on effect of changing the organisation. I could be wrong about this, but you could check into it very easily. But I remember I used to always give Troker a certain amount of money every year and for charity, Until one year I read an article and said that the boss here is making 140,000 a year. So I looked into it and I discovered he was actually, that the top brass in all the charities are now on very high salaries, something like 135. So I wrote to a few of them and I didn't like the answers I got. It was basically keep your nose out of it, and just if you want to stay with St. Vincent de Paul, stay with them and do your little bit or whatever.
So you've touched on a few things here which are really interesting. You've spoken about the Vincent de Paul, which is a Catholic organisation going back into the 19th century, or
going back centuries.
Yeah,
it started in France.
Vincent de Paul himself is a saint. Yeah. So this organisation, when you approached them to see what their stance was on the abortion referendum, and being a Catholic organisation, you assumed that they would be against the proposal to change the constitution, and not only would they be against it, they would actually campaign in some way.
Well, I thought they should campaign myself. I thought they should at least contact all their members and advise them, but that is something they cannot do.
And this is because they're bound by some legal contract with the government.
Yeah, that's it.
Gosh, I've learned something new today. That's really, really interesting.
I've sent in my resignation anyway, and I said the reason I'm leaving is because you're sitting on the fence on these issues.
But do you think that the Vincent de Paul is somehow typical of organisations which have become in some way compromised by their relationship with the state or officialdom?
Yes, I do.
Does the church itself fall into that category?
I don't know about it. You see, that's what I said. I like to keep... The church for me is anybody who follows the man who started it. And that doesn't fall in line with... once you get out of line with that teaching, I can't stay with it, like, you know. When they go against the very principles on which the religion was started.
And do you think there are Catholics today in Ireland who find themselves almost disenfranchised by the very institution itself because their views are not seen to be...
What I think is people haven't thought about it enough, you know. They haven't thought about the fact. At one stage, you see, early in this last century, most of the people who started after 1916, they were nearly all very Christian people, you know. I mean, totally committed Christians, you know. They would have died for their faith, you know. Now, I'm even sure that there are a lot of people who profess to be Christians. They might even be wearing the cloth, who aren't Christians.
In the sense of not actually accepting the essence.
No, that they've lost their faith.
Yeah.
It's since Darwin's brought in his you know, the drop off in Christianity all over Europe has been massive. I firmly believe that whatever is going on today, because it's fresh, you know, if that's the reason T.S. Eliot became so popular, was because he was so fresh, you know. He was coming out with things at a time when nobody was thinking, and the lines he was thinking, and, you know, there was something very fresh, and he got that something from the source, which is France at the time. And he went there, you know. He knew that literature all over the world was dying except for this one area that he went to, and the reason that area was so powerful is because it was built on a foundation that leads people totally astray, and he was led astray. Do you realise that when T.S. Eliot wrote the Wasteland, he almost had a nervous breakdown. He did have a breakdown, in fact. His marriage broke up, he broke down, everything was gone in his life, you know. He couldn't even put together the poem itself. His mind was gone so much, and yet he had to go out and get another man to cobble together this very potent work that has changed the whole face of modern poetry. And it's strange that he converted to Christianity right in the middle of this turmoil.
Now I'm going to press you on something that you mentioned, and I asked you the question earlier about the decline in religious practice and religious faith in this country. Had it had any specific consequences? And you said, well, maybe we haven't fully seen those consequences materialise yet. But you did mention the last two referendums on gay marriage and abortion. Do you not see any kind of relationship there between the decline in faith and the changes in attitude towards something like that, or gay marriage, or whatever it might be?
I see. It's a strange thing, you know, but I actually am fully aware of what's going on now, because I can compare it to, say, go back even into the Old Testament, when the Jews, I'm about to start it now, 40 days, they were 40 years in the wilderness, and when they were finally got to the promised land, we're in the promised land, you could almost say, aren't we? You know, compared to the poverty that went before in centuries gone by, we're living the lap of luxury now. I said this at a few St. Vincent de Paul meetings, you know, where I said, you know, I mean, strictly speaking, that the kind of poverty that used to be there in the last century, at the beginning of it, we don't have it now. I said, there's poverty there still, but the poverty is of the spirit more than anything else. The poverty that's there now, in many ways, is kind of almost ignorance. You know, young people, young married people, when they go into supermarkets, it's almost like going into they're bamboozled by all this junk that's in them, you know, and it's not that they don't have enough money to buy food, you know, it's that the food is no longer nourishing us, or, you know, it's just there to make money for the supermarkets, and we're becoming more and more aware of it. But what I'm saying is that Moses was warned, you know. I mean, I know that the book of Moses is probably, you know, there was a lot of different writers contributed to it and everything. But the basic thing is that if you reach this goal where we actually have plenty, that's the beginning of disaster, because then we suddenly realize that there's nothing there. There's nothing in it. It's going back to Philip Larkin's breathless stare leading nowhere. They got lost. They started believing all these other things about different gods, and you know, it's trying to get rid of all this, get rid of all the idols that we grow up with, you know. I think, though, I firmly believe it, in fact. You know, that's why I get up so early in the morning and I go in and I put on the ashes this morning to remind me that I've just after finishing writing a song actually about this. That there is something absolutely beautiful beyond our comprehension that pulls everything together and will do, you know, and is there. Philip Larkin died in the most miserable circumstances because he lost it. He gave it its great. He spent his life trying to actually believe, and he couldn't. He studied it so hard. He went to the best poets that you could get to try and learn about it, and he learned so much about it. But he backed off in the end, and he ended up desolate, like, you know. But he predicted it when he was a young man, when he wrote this one poem, Deceptions. And it's all about an impoverished man who's bereft. He's lost everything in his life. He has nothing. And what he is saying in the poem is that man who's that way is better off than the man who gets everything that he wants, because there's nothing there, because he had to sacrifice something to get there.
And do you think we as a society have reached that point?
I think we're beginning to reach that point. I think we're beginning to, you know, people are so stupid, like, you know, I mean, like, some man went crazy because he tried to throw out the statue out of his school grounds or something, you know. He took exception to, or some fella, he tried to get the statue of Our Lady and I don't know. It's very disturbing. What's really disturbing for me is what's going on in society. Is that nobody really talk about it very much. You know, I mean, there are huge things changing in society. People seem to think that they can live without God now. That they don't need this old concept that we had, that there's a God in heaven, that there's some force out there who can direct and help us when we get into difficulties. We seem to think that we're not going to get into difficulties ever again, when in fact I can see, and this is another thing that was relating to your questions, I think one of the biggest myths that we're living under in Ireland is the fact that it's all these multinational companies that are feeding our illusions. When they pull out, and they probably will pull out when the tax situation is regulated by the rest of our European counterparts, when they start regulating it, as they should do because it's only fair, this country will be a wasteland. It'll begin to drift back into this terrible wasteland that Greece was in a few years ago. You know, where lots of people were committing suicide because they they didn't have enough just to even basically live, you know, and they were squeezed and squeezed. That will happen here.
No, we're probably moving into the final stage, which is when I'll ask you to speculate about the future. But before we get too deeply into that, based on what you've said about the way in which society has moved over the last 40, 50, 60 years, do you think it was all inevitable, or do you think there was a way in which we might have avoided some of the things that happened? Was there another path we could have taken, or was it just we're on this path and we have to follow it to the bitter end?
No, I'm not a fatalist like that. I believe in free will completely. I believe free will is the basis of Christianity, that we actually have free will. We can determine our own future. That there is no set future there, that we can set it. We can tune in to the proper way to go. There is a proper way to go, and if you don't go that way, you could end up lost. And I've been lost, I can tell you, a few times in my life. One time in particular. But the strange thing is, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
You have mentioned the possibility of multinationals pulling out. Is that what you see as the greatest threat facing the country, or have you anything else in mind?
I think it will be both. It will be the greatest threat to the cosy life we have now, compared to what it could be if they weren't there. You know, but it's a great country. I mean, we have agriculture, fisheries, things like that are our best thing. We all seem to be fixated on the illusion that's going on. I think it's a bit like the Tower of Babel that's happening within IT, you know. Most of what's going on in the internet is rubbish. You know, most of it is actually degrading. But it's all there. I mean, it's in the human makeup anyway, you know. So that kind of evil is there, like, you know. So it's only another way of showing us what human beings are capable of, you know. If you take God out of the equation and some kind of moral basis for life, if you take meaning, you know, that did you realize that most modern poetry is based on the actual assumption that there is no meaning to life, that it's meaningless? Huh?
Postmodernism.
Yeah. Well, I believe totally that there is a meaning to life, you know.
So do you think that Ireland can recover its meaning?
I think
is it possible?
It's still there, you know. I mean, we have a great history of it. It will come back. It's inevitable that it will. Not only will it survive, but it will thrive, you know. I think. I believe. That's why I was up at 6 this morning walking the coastline to get a few ashes in my head, just to remind myself that I'm mortal. I'm going to be dead in a few years.
As we all are.
Yeah.
Can you see a pathway to get us from where we are now to where we could be, or is it just going to happen in some way you don't know how?
No, it isn't. It's a drudge. It's the daily work that we have to do. You know, I work every day. I get up. I've never worked harder than I'm working now at trying to clarify things in my own head and in my own art for people. You know. There's a big resistance against it because people think that I'm off the wall. What I'm saying in my work is not being accepted anymore.
It's not popular, is it?
No. God isn't popular anymore. I mean, look at the God illusion. How many that's millions? Do you know that that man has never come out? Not that I know. I've tried to find out something original that he has to say. I read Darwin's books, 3 of them, I think, 2 or 3 of them. I still have them at home when I was 24, just to see what evolution was about, you know. And I was also reading another man who was highly influenced by all that stuff, Nietzsche.
Oh yes, yeah.
At the same time, I read every book that he brought out.
Right.
I was fascinated by the man. I believed him totally, that there is no God, there is no force, there's no meaning to life except this notion that Nietzsche developed, that there's something called eternal return that will bring everything back, recycled over and over again. And he came to believe that war is a bit like that. My own father used to pump out things like that. He said, you have to have war, you know, to keep the and he bought into that. He dumped God.
It's good for the economy anyway, I believe, if nothing else.
But
so Nietzsche or Darwin didn't ultimately damage your own faith.
They did it for a while.
Yes.
When I read Darwin, you'll get it in my first book as well. You know, I'm looking down at my toes and trying to figure out where all the hairs came from.
Yes, yeah.
No, I believe totally. I mean, anybody that doesn't believe in evolution is with all the facts that are there.
Yes.
But just because, you know, Darwin he didn't actually discover it because it was always there.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, if life has been going for billions of years, so what? This still doesn't mean, you know. Thomas Aquinas tried to figure out the whole thing. And if you go back to your glory be to the Father, just think about that little prayer.
Can I ask you one final question? And I think I might stop there because we've covered a lot of ground.
Right.
But there's a saying that comes to mind in this country whenever we face some kind of potential catastrophe. I'm sure it'll be grand.
Yeah.
Now, does that in any way resonate with you, or is that...
It does, because we have to accept, you know, I mean, I can't go against the trends, you know, there's no way. It would be almost like trying to stop the trend of the 60s. You know, I remember one of the first musical competition I went in for I was only 11 or 12, and the priest actually, I think we were voted first, but the priest there objected to the fact that I was dancing like Elvis or something. And we were demoted to
second. You were gyrating your hips.
And we were put down to second place. And instead of getting 200 sweet Afton as the top prize, we got a box of chocolates or something, which we preferred anyway.
Probably better for you.
But the strange thing is that the priest actually came out and said, this will lead to something terrible, and that's why I'm objecting to it. You should not be doing this. Now, in a way, he was right.
Yeah.
I mean, all our present drug culture comes from where?
Pop music.
No, it doesn't come from pop music.
Not the music.
From jazz.
Yeah.
It comes from the guys in America that deviated from the gospel music. They went off, and they've been warned all the time, do not go there. You know what I mean? You're corrupting something very pure. Ray Charles even said it himself, you know. But you can't stop it. You see, it's a force that cannot be stopped. And the thing that the priest didn't realize is that good can come out of evil, you know, all the time. And I've discovered so much by going out into the world that I would never have discovered, you know. As a 16-year-old, I arrived in London at the height of their. It was almost like Wordsworth being in France, Paris, at the time of the French Revolution.
Yes,
And we played in a club called the Speakeasy. The first night I was there, and on stage, I was just about to start first song when Jimi Hendrix walked in.
Wow.
Followed by Brian Jones and the Rolling Stones.
Wow.
Followed by Kent Heath's lead singer, who died. Within a year, all three of them were dead from overdose, from drugs.
Yeah.
By the time I was 21, I think it was 21, I stopped completely. The final chapters in my first part of that book is me giving up and turning my back on all the ethos of the 60s, drugs especially.
A lot of people in your situation would have said, to hell with it all, it's all evil. Music, drugs, the works, it's all evil, just I'll become a monk or something like that, and I'll banish it all into the background. But you didn't do that. You went a much more individual path.
It never is all evil, you see, because you see, I've seen some met wonderful people along the way, and still do, you know. I mean, the fact that I love Philip Larkin so much, he's an atheist. Well, I mean, the strange thing, and the corollary of it should be the corollary of that, you know, just because I'm a Catholic, people shouldn't turn away from me. My work is there; it stands on its own. You know, it's as good as you know. But they don't. A lot of people that seem to criticize me seem to forget about the work and just go for the fact.
Yeah.
This guy, how come he's a Catholic?
They go for the man, not the ball.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's it for today. I would like to thank Johnny Duhan for sharing his thoughts and opinions with us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Please listen out for the next episode coming up soon. Goodbye.